want to see if this will work. That was an amazing talk by Mark. That was so interesting, and a really great advertisement for SemGrep, surprisingly. Good timing. I'm here to talk about starting with an exit in mind, how to be effective by being selfish as a staff engineer. Let's see if I'm Adam. I'm the head of engineering at SemGrep. I have a puppy at home named Soda. He's very cute. And I feel a little silly up here, like Gordon Gekko, like I'm going to give it to you a talk about how to be selfish. But I do believe that sometimes being just like a little bit selfish is important. I want to share a story from a previous role that helped me learn some tough lessons. And maybe some of you have felt similarly at times. I was a senior engineer. I had gotten to being a senior engineer by being like responsible, someone who followed through, who ran towards all the fires, all the things my mentors had told me to do. And I got an opportunity to switch to a new team. I was really excited about it. The first quarter with the team, I felt like I was doing amazing work, like building lots of new stuff, mentoring, improving things. And a few months went by, and the team was successful, and I kept on building, and I was a responsible engineer. So I made sure to maintain what I'd already built. And it was just a couple of projects, a couple of systems. How much maintenance work could there really be? But eventually, I started to feel like more and more of my time was going into maintenance. My current projects were taking longer, were slipping past their deadlines, and each project, each system didn't have a ton of maintenance on its own, but in aggregate, maintenance was taking up a ton of time. I realized that I was not making good choices. I was saying yes to everything, trying to be responsible, but dozens of small yeses were making it harder for me to get the most important parts of my job done. What had gotten me to senior was preventing me from scaling my impact beyond that. Even worse, those previous charts were obviously misleading. There's a ton of other stuff that goes on in engineering, like interviewing, logistics, admin work, so really even less time for building. And if you're anything like me, I didn't really top out at 100%. I was going way over capacity quarter over quarter and feeling more and more burned out every day. So maybe this is obvious. This is bad. I was not hired for maintenance mode. You were not hired for maintenance mode. We were hired for creativity, for problem solving, for managing relationships, for our ability to make a big impact on the business by leading big, impactful work. I was burnt out. I was personally dissatisfied, and I wasn't that impactful to the team or the business. So I'll say the controversial thing. As a staff engineer, we have to learn to be a little bit selfish. So let's think about how we can be effectively selfish. I want to start with the risk framework I use. This is somewhat general purpose, but for every risk there is on one axis the likelihood that something will go wrong, and then on the other axis there are the consequences if that thing goes wrong. The risk that I stumble over some of my words here today, highly likely, but honestly, like pretty low consequence. Most standard features and projects in the roadmap fit into this bucket. We have code reviews, we have design reviews, we have a bunch of tools in our toolbox that make sure that people's mistakes, which they make all the time, have safeguards and the consequences are low. The risk that I physically stumble off the stage and hurt myself here, high consequence, but I think I'm coordinated enough that the likelihood is low. In my experience, infrastructure work can sometimes fit into this bucket. Like a playbook is really well tested, the behaviors are well understood, but every once in a while, you hit a new edge case during an upgrade, the whole cluster goes down, and that's your day, your week, your month, whatever it is. As a staff engineer, we should be optimizing to spend as much of our time in this top right-hand bucket as possible, where the likelihood of something going wrong is high, and the consequences, if that does go wrong, are also high. If the consequences are low, this is a good learning opportunity for someone else. There are low-cost mistakes that other people can make. Those mistakes will help other people learn. And if the consequences are high, but the likelihood is low, a little bit of effort here to build guardrails can allow someone else to take over that work and stay on the happy path. But if something needs to get done for the business, and the consequences are high, and the likelihood of it going wrong are also high, whether that's because of technical risk or an interpersonal risk or something else, that's where staff engineers can be most impactful. The nature of this work, though, is that as you dig into it, the risks decrease. Maybe you've de-risked the technology or built a prototype that demonstrates the value. The trick is figuring out the right way to hand off the project so that you can go take on the next set of work in that top right quadrant rather than sticking with the now lower risk work. In my experience, there are 4 main options for handing off work. Sometimes a project just goes so well that you can spin up a new team. This is more common for greenfield work. Maybe you're spinning up a new product, spinning up new systems that support multiple teams. But if it goes really well, you can maybe spin off or spin up a new team to own it. You might find a person or an existing team that you can hand off ownership of work to. This works often once you've de-risked the project, shown that it has some real concrete value, and you can find other engineers who can run with it. This is often where it's a really good learning opportunity for someone else, maybe something that you've already done before but could really help them. You might press pause if the project is in a state where it's maybe good enough, and you're confident that there is no long tail of maintenance burden. But we'll talk about the dangers of pressing pause in a minute. And the final option is you might wind down the project. Perhaps the risks couldn't be mitigated or the value just wasn't as high as you thought it was going to be. It's important to recognize that sometimes our ideas don't pan out. The projects that we work on, you learn from them, but it's OK to set this one aside and say we're not going to continue. For your next project, at the very beginning, I encourage you to think about each of these possible paths. Under what circumstances would each be appropriate? What sort of success would you have to show? What risks would you need to mitigate? In general, there are different thresholds for each of these commitments, kind of commensurate with their costs. So if you're going to bootstrap a team, that's pretty expensive. You're going to have to show a really high degree of upside for this work and a pretty clear path to getting there. If you're going to hand it off to someone else, maybe you don't need to demonstrate quite as much degree of upside, but you'll need to show that it's sufficiently de-risked that maybe a less senior engineer can take it on and be successful. To press pause, you'll likely need to have already realized the value, and I encourage you to prove to yourself that the maintenance costs are low. And if you're going to wind it down, you'll probably need to prove that, like, hey, the value just isn't quite there. Again, I encourage you to make this concrete for your next project. Write down some metrics you believe would be indicators that each of these paths might be appropriate. Try to better understand what threshold would you need to cross. A word of warning, as I said, pressing pause sometimes will feel like the easy button, but it is very hard to do successfully. Be careful, because pressing pause implies that if maintenance is needed, you are likely on the hook, and you're signing yourself up for those long-term costs. Winding down a project often feels harder, but it's often also the right choice for the business. If there is not another person or team who could own those maintenance costs, then you probably should not own them either. OK, one last note. This won't work without buy-in from engineering leadership. Don't do this exercise in a vacuum. Bring them in, help them understand your vision for success in the project, talk to them early about the different ways you might be able to hand off a project, and learn from them. What would it take to free up the resources necessary to spin up a team or hand it off? Get specific, get concrete, show them your proposed metrics. Maybe they have some other idea, and if there's misalignment, you can identify that really early as opposed to getting to the end saying, where's the team, and realizing that you were totally thinking about different criteria for success. And I think the final part here is help them put into context the opportunity cost of what you are leaving on the table. What is the company leaving on the table by you not moving on to the next big thing? Again, get specific, look at the roadmap. What are the big things that you wish you could own? What are the big things that they wish someone could own and help move the business forward? And help them understand that things will go slower if you're stretched thin. Things will go slower if you keep on owning these other various projects. I hope this strategy helps you spend more of your time in the top right quadrant. Be just like a little bit more selfish for you and for the business. Thank you so much.